Thank you. The clerk will call the roll. Please correct the pronunciation of your name if it is incorrect.
Amanda Blanton. Bella Brash. Natalia Byer. William Costello. Emma Cumby. Kiki Diapolito. Grant Dorzanowski. Nicholas Govan. Amelia Gay. Caleb Geddens. Kaylee Goodrich. Aiden Gruner. Zoe Hopkins. Daniel Huang. Mohammed Iftikhar. Anita John. Lakika Cassetti. Mia Lapinta. Donnie Lapsley. Jeffrey Lyons. Jackson Matthews. Isabel Miller. Mackenzie Mozo. Brian Peterson. Landon Pollock. Rodrigo Rojas. Taylor Silkert. Lucas Solomon. Amaya Soul. Thomas Spurgeon. William Wenzel. Lawson Windsor. Marion Winters.
Okay, so just a quick rundown of what's going to happen. Quorum is here, so we're going to motion to suspend the rules and let Senate reconvene at 6:15 p.m., so in about 45 minutes from now. In the most non-scary way I can say this, like, after election results come out, if there's, like, a reason that, like, you don't want to come back to Senate or, like, you're feeling really strongly, it's fine. Just shoot me a text, appoint a proxy. You'll be excused. Just let me know if you have any questions. But with the quorum being present, is there a motion to suspend the proceedings of the Senate session until 6:15 p.m.? Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The Senate session is suspended until 6:15. It's all highlighted for you, so I have it right here. Do you want to just do it? Here. All dots for you. Sorry, we're going placard free today, so I'm just going to recall y'all's names. Okay, we can wait for him. That's fine. Ooh, there's a tag of my dress bothering me. I know, Simone, congratulations. Are you so happy? Does somebody have a pen? Sorry, I have none of my stuff today. No. Claire, we're going to do attendance again once I call this, just to be sure. Is that okay? You'll be okay. You know what? It's fine. Most of the people are here. I don't even. Yeah. Before we begin, is there anybody in here right now who wasn't here when we originally did attendance? Okay, Rodrigo is here. Oh, yeah, I definitely do. Oh, you think I don't know everyone's names? I definitely do. Okay. Yeah, yours is William is an easy name for me to remember. You're fine. Okay. The Senate will now come to order. With the quorum being present, is there a motion to... Guys. I really appreciate it. We just do have 26 pieces. Okay, guys. Okay. Lord Jesus. Okay. With the quorum being present, is there a motion to approve the journal of February 19th, 2025 as found online? Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. We are now in line for general orders of the Senate, beginning with reports from Senate leadership. Speaker Pro Tempore Byer, you are recognized to give a report on the Rules Committee.
Hi everybody. So rules met as per usual last Sunday at 5:30 and we reviewed 6 pieces of legislation, all of which were found unanimously favorable except one that was found unanimously unfavorable. Thank you to everybody who submitted delegation chairperson recommendations, and if you haven't done that and you are a delegation chair, please just try to get that in as soon as possible. Thank you, and I yield my time to questions.
The Speaker Pro Tempore yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. We will now hear a report from the Academics Committee. Chairwoman Anderson, you are recognized.
Hi guys, academics met Tuesday at 7 p.m. and we reviewed 4 pieces of legislation, SBL 116, 102, 105, 110, and 112, which were all found unanimously favorable, and that's all we did. And with that, I yield my time to questions.
The Chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. We will now hear a report from the Finance Committee. Chairman Wenzel, you are recognized.
Finance Committee met at the normal time. We have no major updates, so with that, I yield my time to questions.
The Chairman yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. We will now hear a report from the Health and Safety Committee. Chairman Gruner, you are recognized.
Hey guys, happy Wednesday. We finished the menstrual product drive. Yay! For those of you who do not know, we gathered over 11,500 menstrual products that were dispensed, that we were able to dispense in over 25 bathrooms. I do want to give a special thank you to the MPD leadership team for all the hard work that they were putting in over the last couple months. So huge shout out to them. We're doing a tabling event Monday with SCPC, so if you can make it, please do. I'm going to be bringing a lot more hot chocolate because that's what students like more. And we've got a few pieces of legislation from Senator Miller. And with that, I yield my time to questions.
The chairman yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. We will now hear a report from the Inclusion and Equity Committee. Are there any representatives present willing to speak? It's okay if not. Yeah? Okay. Chairman Gruner, you're once again recognized.
Sorry, Chairwoman Lakika couldn't make it, but essentially they held their multicultural summit yesterday. Went super well. Thank you to all the speakers who were there for that. And with that, I yield my time to questions.
The chairman yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. We will now hear a report from the Judiciary Committee. Chairwoman Diapolito, you are recognized.
Judiciary did not meet this week in person, but we did vote on 5 pieces of legislation online. We voted on 104, 115, 116, 117, and 118, which we found favorable. I yield my time to questions.
The chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. We will now hear a report from the Powers and Responsibilities Committee. Are there any representatives present wishing to speak? Senator Silkert, you are recognized.
Hi guys, so Powers met at our normal time this Friday and reviewed 5 pieces of legislation. We found SBL 112 and 116 favorable and 115, 117, and 118 not favorable. With that, I yield to questions.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. We will now hear a report from the Student Life Committee. Chairwoman Blanton, you are recognized.
Hi guys, so Student Life met on Monday at 6:30 in the LSC, and we voted on 6 pieces of legislation. We found 99, 106, 111, 117, and 110 all favorable, and then 101 we found unfavorable by a vote of 1 to 7. And then we had senators finishing up the legislation, which is going well, and then we decided to kind of table our community outreach event just based on the timeline of the rest of what Senate was looking like, but happy with all of the legislation this semester, so I yield my time to questions.
The chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Can the chairwoman repeat the piece that was found unfavorable?
Yes, it was 116, 101. It was concerning dress code for campus.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. We will now hear a report from the Sustainability Committee. Chairwoman LaPinta, you are recognized.
Hey everyone, we did in fact meet on Monday at 6:30 in the LSE, at 6, excuse me. We didn't really talk about much. I was thinking about potentially writing a piece of legislation for next week, but that's still in the works. And with that, I'll yield the questions.
The chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the chairwoman? Seeing none, thank you. We will now hear a report from the Freshman Council. Are there any representatives from the Freshman Council present? Seeing none, we will now hear a report from the Constitutional Council. Chief Justice Buchmeyer, you are recognized.
Hello all. It's been a eventful week for everyone, I'm sure. Generally, I'm going to start out with the report by saying, per the requirements of the codes, we're proactively working to make sure everything gets uploaded to the drive properly. I'm going to defer more broadly for any clarity or anything like that on specific rulings or anything that, lest I not quote it properly, to what will get published in the drive and publicly released. But that being said, so general rundown of last week, based off code changes to Chapter 4 that happened last fall, the CC has taken up the original jurisdiction for elections challenges and for violations, which has yielded a very busy election period for us. So any codes, any challenges that weren't invalidated and then weren't invalidated and appealed and found to have granted an injunction have been in the process of being heard by the CC. That led to the proceedings yesterday evening, which if recollection serves me, there were originally 3 that were merged into the 1 complaint, and then 2 more, so originally 5 challenges that were heard as 3, because 3 of them were originally merged. That decision was released. It was released this morning to them. Per the codes, we have 3 days to write a decision on that, write the actual opinion on that. So the decision has been released. We're working on getting the opinion written. Today and yesterday and today, there was a lot more movement on more violations being filed, which at a lack of invalidation of the elections committee, CC started to process. One of the big difficulties of the codes as they were updated is that it says unless CC votes otherwise, we are to hold hearings on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. We've been pushing it to 7 for the sake of schedules of the Constitutional Council, but trying to abide by this Tuesday, Thursday rules during the election period. But it creates a very fast timeline for getting all of the information and filings in for those cases. So today we had a very fast schedule based off, because again, the codes rule that anything that has not been already heard or invalidated and still is invalidated must be heard at the next proceeding. So that put us on the schedule of requests for briefs today in the same format we did for the hearings on Tuesday, but with naturally slightly less time. As a result, on a number of cases, briefs were not able to be submitted, which everyone was fully aware of the schedule being posted into the codes. Again, the Constitutional Council is bound by what is in the codes and trying to operate as best we can within that structure. So this is really, again, an impact of the codes as they are written. And so currently there is 1 outstanding election complaint that was neither rescinded this afternoon nor invalidated, or not invalidated because that's the wrong term, but nor dropped for the lack of brief submission in a timely manner. And that is on schedule to be heard tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. We're still working on finding a room for that because I believe I think they said the Law Journal has the big courtroom up in the law school. So we're actively working on trying to find a location. Again, it's been difficult for us because we have about a 2-day turnaround to process claims, get briefs, file procedure, and find locations to do all these hearings. That being said, that's the only one we have outstanding for CC at this point. If there's any questions pertaining towards the cases heard yesterday or which will be heard tomorrow, anything with the cases heard yesterday, there's in the public drive, there's the elections, Elections 2025 public information folder. Filed violations will have everything that has been filed and is split, right? Once it has been heard by us, about to come before us, that's when it will start to get processed also into that CC folder, which has any documentation pertaining to the hearing of that case. So if you have any questions about relevant documentation for the case itself in the briefs, that would be the location to look for that. Again, it's been a very hectic week, so we're actively working to get everything uploaded per the codes. I do not believe there's an upload past the publication of decision opinion. There's not an actual requirement for how quickly we get in there, but we're trying as fast as we can. But again, it's been a busy week and evening, and likely through tomorrow as we have the one still the one case left. Any further questions past that? I think that's a good basis, and with that, I'll yield to questions.
The Chief Justice yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Chairwoman LaPinta.
So the decision from yesterday's hearing is out, right? So per the codes, the decision is to be released immediately after. Granted, this was also a relative difficulty being that the proceedings finished well past 11 p.m. yesterday, and then Constitutional Council at that time still has to go into deliberation for their actual rulings. Granted, there were 3 cases being reviewed. one could imagine we don't necessarily move quickly because, again, we want to make sure we follow the codes well and give everything the most thorough and complete process of review we can. So the deliberation period, from my understanding, went on for quite a while. I think the decision rolled out early this morning per the codes for the, as it's now formatted, election cases that we hear independently, right? Because you also then you can have appeals to the Election Commission, right? That's a separate in the codes from just the original case filing. So the Election Commission invalidates. That is like a normal constitutional council standard proceeding. That would give us a longer period, but per the codes pertaining towards the election hearings, we'll have 3 university days to write and publish that actual opinion, right? So we have to get the decision out quickly, but then we do have a little bit of lag time until we can get the decision out. As far as I know, it's actively being worked on. Of course, I was recused for most of this, so I was not present at any of the standing of the procedure for that. I believe then acting Chief Justice Bryant has assigned that out, and they're actively working on it to write the broader opinion from their decision that's already been released. So at the point of its release, we will have it again. There's a lot of documentation we're going to need to process through to get into the folders online. We will send it out once it is released, the full opinion, to the relevant parties, likely the election commissioner, all the justices, and also at that point, likely CCN, student gov advisors. So at that point, it would likely be good to either request it from them, or if it's not being processed in a timely fashion, or as you lack access to it at that point, I would merely ask that you reach out. Again, we've been slightly inundated. And on that note, I would guess speak more broadly. I guess it's a relevant event of the last week outside of the hearing of the cases themselves. There was, for a brief point during the week and before it was eventually rescinded, that summons were issued to both myself and then acting Chief Justice Bryant by the Senate Judiciary Committee regarding concerns about proper notification procedures relevant to the codes, and this was centered around the injunction filed on the invalidation of one of the Black versus TCAX Richardson filings. At that point, it became a lasting email thread. It was initially then rescinded against me because I recused myself early afternoon at the request of the party on Friday out of deference towards them. And then the actual procedure went through for the injunction shortly after that. So there was a handoff during that. And so upon that realization, the summons was rescinded against me. But at that point, it was still active against acting Chief Justice Bryant. After broader communication with the Senate Judiciary Committee, that summons was also rescinded. And I would just say, for clarity on that, there is a clause that says for that in the codes, I don't know the succession, it's upon receipt. Upon receipt's not clearly defined within the codes based on the character of the broader section. The Constitutional Council's operating procedure was to interpret that under the business day terms, of which is more broadly used without the section. So we were under the understanding and the practice that we would be given a business day to process that through. I understand there was some concerns regarding the timeline of the processing of the injunction and the granting of it with regards to the notification procedure. Again, there's not necessarily, although during the appeals process to any complaints, right? So whether that's there, right, of a clear timeline, but because this was, in fact, now part of this new process, there's less clarity as into like a formal submission of brief. And then also there's never necessarily been a clear progressive step about a granting of standing for injunctive relief relative to a notification period, because again, upon receipt is defined. For any confusion that might cause, I will personally apologize, having not been part of that. Again, it's been a busy week, and then there was also the handoff and communications, which made that slightly more difficult for us to process through all that information. Going forward, I would just like to ask for relative patience in those processes. We're trying our best to do with what we've got in the codes, and there are certain points where it can become difficult to work through it all, particularly as we were working to adjust the new Chapter 4 of the codes versus the previous procedures outlined for elections. So I'll just add an addendum on the back of that question because I didn't address that earlier.
Are there any other questions? Senator Gettins.
So the decisions are all published, right? It was sent out to relevant parties. I believe, we have until the day after, and because the decisions I don't think were actually made till after midnight, we'll still have until tomorrow to publish through that. If there's not necessarily been access, I'll work with, student government advising staff to make sure we can get that into that folder so it is publicly posted. All parties relevant were informed on the decisions. To not, again, because of my recusal from those cases and my lack of participation in them, I will not speak on them. Any relevant information as to the decisions are all listed on that statement released by Acting Chief Justice Bryant. So the decisions were made, and that information has been released to relevant parties, and I believe we've been working on getting it publicly posted, and if it's not yet, again, I apologize. We were dealing with I believe it was an early afternoon, it was 5 different active rolling cases the entire afternoon. So it's just also been balancing previous with oncoming. Thank you if you have not seen it, we'll get to work on that, but I believe it should be publicly available if it's not already.
Are there any other questions? Senator Lyons.
So the request for recusal, you can see again, I know for a fact that section has already been uploaded to the drive. There was a motion by Mr. Wesley Black for my recusal against from the cases of the relevant parties. This stems from what was originally just a meeting to go through the elections challenge and violation process last Tuesday. At the request of the parties, it went into a mediation in effect. Any questions around that can be readily found within both his filing, and I believe as evidence they attached an audio recording of the entirety of that proceeding if there's any questions to what happened during that. The reason for my recusal, per the codes, a justice of the Constitutional Council will recuse themselves at majority vote of the council. Out of deference to the petitioner in this case, I went ahead and recused myself at their behest before a formal vote even went through. That's not said necessarily they wouldn't have voted for my recusal, but I went ahead and recused myself out of deference to them, because again, that was not my intention, to say the least, to put anyone in his position where they felt they couldn't adequately be heard or represented.
Are there any other questions? Senator Lyons.
So confusion stemmed, and again, this was part of the procedural mess that came from me having to take a step back from the proceedings. There was slight confusion as to what the process for Constitutional Council staff to add. Acting Chief Justice Bryant was at that point very busy and was concerned. A closer reading of the codes shows that, in fact, the procedure is the Constitutional Council appoints staff, and I think the relevant section code is section 5417. and then it merely outlines a notification within 4 Senate sessions. I think there might have been a slight misread as to notification to like, it was regarding that, which led to some confusion. Again, on behalf of the Constitution Council, I apologize for that. It was not our intention to create a mess on that front. But upon further reflection and review, it was reading the codes, we could point and then we'll notify. So that's the procedure that took place, is that yesterday we appointed and then swore in staff for the Constitutional Council, a bailiff and a court stenographer, to make sure that we had proper staff as outlined in the codes for the proceedings. And then upon their appointment, there was a notification forwarded to the Speaker of the Senate regarding those appointments. And so again, for any confusion that might have stemmed from that, I apologize. That was also a little bit of the difficulty of adjusting between procedures.
Any other questions? Senator Lyons.
So typically the procedure is upon vacancy, there's a filling. Most of those vacancies are outstanding before my time on the court. Upon realization of that, we currently have acting staff in those roles. There's a lot of difficulty that comes from staffing the Constitutional Council, largely stemming from the fact that cases typically have not been frequent in the last couple of years. And it's hard for people graduating out, because there's also a specific clause in that they'll generally remain in the position until removal, resigning, or graduation. And so I do think that was potentially an oversight of that there was no one in those roles. But the typical point of either the bailiff or court stenographer is naturally necessary for having a hearing in case. And as precedented procedure, as I observed it from previous Chief Justice Cathcart, was always an understanding is that we would appoint those positions and make sure they're filled for their actual purpose, which is, of course, the proceedings. Last fall, I would believe there was no one necessarily in those positions at that time, to my knowledge, which again is hard because the institutional bandwidth of how long they stand and some of the handoff between previous councils and the current, and what the sake of information in that is. But that also did not actually ever proceed to a hearing where those positions would have been required, as it was denied standing, right? And that, again, if there's any questions of that case, I believe we also have that in that folder. But
Are there any other questions? Senator Lyons.
I will say that at every step of the way, every person I knew to be involved with made an absolute good faith effort to try to do the best they could, the best effort they could possibly do in holding the codes and the Constitution, right? Some of that can become difficult if needs to be an interpretation, but across the board, there was never a doubt in my mind that everyone made a good faith effort to follow the codes and Constitution, one, procedurally, and then two, textually in the application of any decisions or rules, right? To the extent that there might be an emotional feeling out there, I can't comment on that. I don't necessarily know that myself. I can only comment that at every step of the proceeding, that the Constitutional Council took every step it possibly could to make sure that everyone had their rights properly heard and protected as pertaining to the student government Constitution and codes. I think there's also then a broader question of some people feel that they're frustrated with the codes or the Constitution themselves. That is not the purview of the Constitutional Council. That would be something they would express to the Student Senate as far as changing those codes and Constitution. And I would, just like as general point, the Constitutional Council's bound to uphold the codes and the Constitution. We work with what is there in the text. If people don't like what's in the text, that's a different question. What our oath and what our duty is constitutionally prescribed to do is to go by the text that's there. And so as far as that goes, again, every step of the way, we work to follow what is written as far as to give an interpretation, what is in the codes and Constitution, to follow that procedure as outlined, to make sure that we were in fact not violating the codes and Constitution. But that being said, there is frustration. Again, purpose of CC is that we have to follow the codes and the Constitution, even if that sometimes creates difficult situations as turning 2 hearings around in a 1-week period.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank y'all.
We will now hear a report from the Speaker of the Senate, Maura Hamilton. Speaker of the Senate, Maura Hamilton, you are recognized. I was going to get the data analyzed for food for thought. They canceled the meeting on me 10 minutes before I was supposed to be there, and I was already sitting in the library. That's okay. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. We will now hear a report from the Student Body Treasurer. Treasurer Lykin, you are recognized.
Hi, everyone. As far as internal budget, we've used 97% of it, which is great, as some of the election results just came out. We have a little over $1,500 left in the FROCO budget, which they're planning a legacy project for, 700 in initiatives, and about 1,000 left in the exec fund. I think there's plans in place for most of that. If you think you have anything else that you need to submit for, please notify me immediately. Additionally, if you're waiting on a reimbursement for something and you're not sure where that is for internal student government requested things, please let me know. I've reached out to some of you about things in Garnet Gate and been back and forth on that for weeks, so please start responding so we can get those moving. External, we've spent almost 70% of our external budget, which is great as we're into March, and the reimbursement video is out now, so orgs, when they're getting their emails from Chairman Wenzel about getting allocations, there should be like a tutorial attached to hopefully speed along the reimbursement process. We also switched around a bunch of stuff in the Garnet Gate request system to hopefully make it easier. And for Sustainability Committee, we added back in the green certification link, so everyone has easy access to that now. As far as reimbursements, as of today, there is over $99,000 outstanding in reimbursements for student orgs between 66 requests. We have approved currently almost $67,000. That's over, we've approved in the last week, or finance team for the university has approved over $7,000 between 2 travel reimbursements. We've had over $40,000 approved, reimbursements fully processed since January 29th, which is great. I've been working closely with Matt Hines to try and do what we can to speed this process along. What he has done very graciously is put together a new system for kind of allocating the reimbursement requests to members of the finance team. So somebody submits a reimbursement request, he processes it, a member of the university finance team claims it. A lot of the issues has come from those members just not claiming requests. So he's putting together a new system that will be a little more publicly accessible, and so hopefully they'll be able to see what they need to claim easier. We have 2 outstanding reimbursement requests that were submitted in September. One is still outstanding because of a lack of student response. The other one, I'm not sure. We have 2 outstanding from October. We have 10 outstanding from November, and 5 of the reimbursement requests that were submitted in November have not yet been claimed by a member of the university finance team, which means that they have not even begun processing that. So I will continue to update you all on that. I'll continue to push for that. Hopefully I'll be able to work with the next treasurer in the transition phase to make sure that they can continue fighting for quicker reimbursements. And I think with that, I yield my time to questions.
The Student Body Treasurer yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we're now in line for a report from the Student Body Vice President. Treasurer Lykin, you are once again recognized.
All right, hi guys. For Courtney's updates, FROCO had to reschedule their Carolina Closet event from last week because of the weather. They'll have an update on that soon. That'll be released in the GroupMe, and her staff are all working on transition documents. Yield my time to questions.
The Student Body Treasurer yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we are now in line for a report from the Student Body President. Staffer Lloyd, you are recognized.
Hey guys, very short and sweet today. Land just got back from their trip to DC, and as a result of that, they need to print out their reports. So the student body president is requesting money from the IMF budget to compensate for that because there was not a pre-allocation for money for them to be able to do that. And that is all. I yield the questions.
The staffer yields its time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. We're now in line for a report from the Elections Commission. Commissioner Duty, you're recognized.
Hello, everyone. First off, thank you so much for joining us for the election results. It was so beautiful out tonight. I'm so excited for the senators that were able to get reelected, and you guys are able to continue to serve the student body. I have honestly not seen in my time here such a cohesive and productive Senate in the way that I have for this one. So I'm super excited for those who are returning. Just the amount of tangible things you've been able to do for the student body has been amazing. It made my job really easy, and this extends to the vice president and president as well. It made my job super easy to promote people filing for elections, because just send out a quick email and then they're like, oh, I know student government, Senate's done amazing work, VP, I've seen this, that, and the other. So thank you to everybody who's done that. And once again, I'm so excited for the people who got elected. And I did want to say that if you did not get the result that you were anticipating, please do not let that discourage you in any way. It is not a reflect on your work that you've done here in Senate or that you will continue to do on campus. I firmly believe that the character of everybody who has been in Senate before or currently is very strong, and I think that's evident in what you guys have been able to do. I will also say that I was a committee chair for health and safety. My sophomore year, I ran for re-election, and I did not get reelected. I was one of the only Darla Moore senators tabling, the only one who submitted posters to be put across in Darla. So sometimes things like these happen. I was then given the chance to be chief of staff for the treasurer. So I just want to encourage you guys that when one door closes, another opens. So just keep that in mind and keep your eyes open for different positions. I encourage you within student government, but there's also many outside of student government that are super impactful to the student body. So moving on, I wanted to kind of follow up on what Chief Justice Buchmeyer said concerning the injunction motion that was placed on the Elections Commission. There was some lack of understanding on both sides of the due process for the injunction itself. We were able to get that figured out, and we are on the common ground. I was able to sit down with Acting Chief Justice Sam Bryant, and we were able to work through those concerns, and I no longer have any concerns with anything that has happened. So we're all on the same page, so we're all good there. And then I just wanted to provide you guys with a timeline for the rest of my commission here. So tomorrow night will be the final hearing for the outstanding election violation. Given the hope that there are no more filed, that will mean immediately following that, I will go into a room as soon as the deliberation is done and the punishment or lack thereof is issued. I will go into a room and certify the results immediately. And then we will take everyone outside of the law school, and we will be announcing those results immediately at the conclusion of the outstanding violation. And then that will conclude the results for the normal election. So if you guys were out there, you did hear that there is a runoff election for the College of Arts and Sciences. The way that's going to work is I'm coordinating with Emma, the advisor, to make sure that we have sufficient tabling provided for the candidates and their staff. Further, we will coordinate with them to make sure that if they do want to be in the College of Arts and Sciences, that all the proper approvals are there. The tabling will only be on Tuesday and Wednesday. Before then, their posters may remain up, their posts may remain up. Anything pertaining to pre-campaign is still valid for now. And then we will move into a voting period where I am attempting to see if I can get just students of College of Arts and Sciences to receive the email, because that's where the senators are, nobody else can vote. And then they will receive another vote or another email on Tuesday, encouraging them to cast their vote. They will only be able to vote for one of the two senators, and then it will be the 9 a.m. Tuesday opening, Wednesday closing, and then we will once again go out on Green Street and announce the results of that runoff election. and then that will conclude the voting and tabulation notification of the runoff election. Following that, we will then post those results. If you go into the LSC right now, you will see that the results of tonight's are already posted. So if you're curious on the specific numbers, you can go there. And then on March 19th, we will have the inauguration rehearsal at 5:30 p.m. in the Rutledge Chapel. And on March 20th, we will have the actual inauguration at 5:30 in the chapel, followed by the reception at the President's house. To my knowledge, that is the complete timeline for the rest of the election season. And thank you guys so much for listening to me yap up here for this semester. So if you guys have any questions, I can answer those now. I yield the questions.
Point of information, we have Senate at 5:30 p.m. on the 19th. We can discuss later, but
Okay.
that is scheduled.
I thought that it was done the week before. It's not.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
We'll discuss later. Sorry. Are there any questions for the commissioner? Senator Lyons.
Has that been passed? Was there passage of a bill to clarify that, or was that more of a decision from the Senate? Because I'm not asking to like be confrontational. I'm just trying to get some clarity on that. That is, part of that is my fault. I've been getting like 5 hours of sleep the past couple weeks, and I meant to coordinate with you guys to write an amendment to allow that to be in next term. I don't want to take her responsibilities away from either freshman council or the elections commission. She has verbally asserted that she would rather be a part of the elections commission. If it pleases you as a body, I will temporarily stop her from engaging in freshman council. And if she wishes to stick with us, and then perhaps we could work something through. To my understanding, that's on the second reading calendar
Yes,
right
it
now.
is.
Yeah, so I meant to coordinate and try to get an amendment to have that next term. I think that would be most beneficial for her, because from understanding of us and people we have spoken to, it was something that is allowed. So yeah, that's all I have to comment on that.
Chairwoman Diapolito.
Okay, perfect. I'll keep an eye out for that. I will let her know now to kind of recuse herself from freshman council duties temporarily. Given the passage of that amendment, I will then let her know. I cannot stick around here, unfortunately. I'm going to go home and do my research, but I will.
To clarify, no legislation has been passed yet.
No-
As of right now, it is allowed within the codes to be serving in two branches at once.
Could I be notified as soon as possible if the amendment is passed? Would that be possible?
Yeah, it should be introduced in like
Cool.
5 minutes.
Okay, I'll hang out then. All right. Any other questions?
Senator Lyons.
I do not believe there to be any bias in any decision that has been given by the Constitutional Council, any information inconsistency given by the Election Commission either. I think that sometimes it can be a little difficult when students perceive student government to be more inclusive as a branch, and those feelings can definitely arise. I think that is something that is natural to happen, but I do not believe, like, emotions aside, I believe that the case proceeded properly, the decision was proper, and my involvement in the case past our initial screening of it has been minimal at best, because that is more of a Constitutional Council jurisdiction at that point. So again, we are not involved in really the decision-making in the slightest. I was only called as a witness to testify to the role of election commissioner. So once again, I do not believe there to be any bias.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. We are now in line for special orders of the Senate. Are there any letters, petitions, appointments, applications, or other the clerk will now read?
A communication from the Office of the Constitutional Counsel regarding the appointment of Brian Scheffler to bailiff and Levi Taylor to court stenographer.
Received. Chairwoman LaPinta. There's been a motion to appoint Senator Cumby as Chairwoman LaPinta's proxy. Is there a second? All's in favor? Without objection, so ordered. Oh, my lord. Chairwoman LaPinta. Granted. Chairwoman Anderson. There's been a motion to appoint Senator Winters as Chairwoman Anderson's proxy. Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Chairwoman Anderson. Granted. Yes, read that one too. Continuing on with the special orders of the Senate, are there any letters, petitions, appointments, applications, or other? The clerk will now read.
A communication from the office of the student body president concerning the removal of funds from the executive fund.
I want to clarify that should read Internal Monetary Fund.
Internal monetary fund.
So sorry. The question is of the removal of $208.06 from the Internal Monetary Fund for the purpose of government relations printing. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The allocation is granted. Continuing on with the special orders of the Senate, are there any letters, appointments, petitions, applications, or other? The clerk will now read.
A communication from the office of the Speaker of the Student Senate concerning the resignation of Donnie Lapsley from the position of Student Senator.
Received. Continuing on with the special orders of the Senate, are there any letters, petitions, appointments, applications, or other? The clerk will now read. Seeing no more special orders of the Senate, we are now on the motion period. Are there any motions on the floor at this time? Chairman Wenzel. There's been a motion to move the recommendation permitting the Finance Committee to allocate funds to the first reading calendar. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. The legislation is placed on the first reading calendar and given the number 124. Senator D'Appolito. There's been a motion to table SBL 116-104 until the following Senate session. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is tabled for a period of 1 week. Senator Mozo. Do you mean SBL 122? There's been a motion to remove Senator Mozo as a sponsor for SBL 116-121. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The sponsor is removed from the legislation. Are there any other motions on the floor at this time? Senator Gettins. There's been a motion to add the legislation pertaining to fee and insurance transparency at the Center for Health and Wellbeing to the first reading calendar. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. The legislation is added to the first reading calendar. Are there any other motions on the floor at this time? Senator Lyons. All right. Do these sponsors find this amendment favorable or unfavorable? All right. Seeing no objections, this amendment is now adopted. Senator Gruner. Do the sponsors find this amendment favorable or unfavorable? Seeing no objections, this amendment is now adopted. Are there any other motions on the floor at this time? Senator Hopkins. There's been a motion to appoint Senator Wenzel as Senator Hopkins' proxy. Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Senator Hopkins. Granted. Are there any other motions on the floor at this time? Seeing no more motions, is there a motion to take a brief recess so I can figure out whatever I messed up in the drive, please? Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Can I see that script again, Claire? I'm sorry. I don't know what I did. And you have the titles there? No. They're in the drive? Yeah, I just If you just amended a piece of legislation, can you come up here, please? Yeah, because something was denied during rules, so it changed numbers. I think that's why I was confused about what you were amending.
So you're fine. But we got you. You're the first. It's good to see you again.
I don't understand what I messed up. We've got 50 minutes to get through all this legislation. What? It was 15, right?
If it hits 8 o'clock.
No, we've never done it, and I'm not trying to do it today. How did I mess this up so bad that you never do stuff like this? What's wrong?
So I'm actually not.
115, right? Okay. Jeffrey, was yours submitted on the Garnicate form, or did you email it to me? Got it. Okay. That's why I missed it. Here, I will just edit it right here if you show me. So which piece of legislation is it?
Notice her last. Okay. She goes by Dr. B. Very cool. I love it. But
TG38?
yeah, and then like, isn't that weird? Upside down letters.
Okay, just that?
Yep, that's all.
Awesome. We got that.
It sounds interesting. It's interesting, but it's like I don't know. We just have a final, and so that's why I'm kind of like scared. I'm like, I can do the homework like when I have my notes, but
Claire.
yes.
Sorry. Do I have your script right now? This is yours?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the day after Mother's Day. Isn't that terrible? So it's like I know that I'm gonna have to log in after, unless like I took her for a class and her final was like the exact same as this guy. So I'm like, what are the chances? She doesn't have all her classes. Right, I know. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
What are you doing to our poor Aiden? What? Did you say that you don't like seeing his face, you said? Yeah. Why? No, it's not. Wait, Wenzel, is that new burger place? Oh, you got Einstein. They have a new burger place in Russell House I really want to try.
They keep getting new places.
Here. The Senate will now come to order. And point of information, SBL 116-121, the one pertaining to the clinical education building, which, by the way, the legislative numbers got messed up because a piece of legislation was denied in rules. That now the sponsorship has just changed to Senator Gettins and Senator Blanton because it can no longer be sponsored by a delegation if someone's missing, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you're fine. Yep. All right. We are now on the call of the introduction of new legislation. The clerk will now read.
SBL 116-119, sponsored by the Finance Committee, a bill to allow the Finance Committee to review requests submitted fewer than 15 university days before the event.
The Finance Committee is recognized to speak on this legislation.
It's a mouthful, guys, I know. Okay, so we have been working on this problem pretty much all term, where we had, in the codes, you had to submit a request 15 university days prior to the event taking place. And that is in there mostly to give our process enough time to process these requests, to give our system enough time to process the requests. But that has caused issues, especially around like breaks, like winter break, fall break, election day, days where you're not really, if you're not in the system, you're not going to realize that that's not going to count as a university day. So we think we found a solution to this problem that kind of still incentivizes submitting requests further out, but also allows the committee to essentially vote on any request that gets to our step. And so let me pull it up real quick. The language, that's the way the language allows. So right now, it is pretty much just like this. Requests must be submitted 15 university days prior to the event, and that's been fairly stringent this term. So we're changing that to, for consideration by the Finance Committee to be ensured, allocation requests must be submitted 15 university days prior to the event. And it's in there reiterating that allocation requests that have already occurred will not be considered by the Finance Committee, and it then refers you back to exceptions to that rule earlier in the codes. So this essentially gives the committee leeway and allows us to vote on anything that gets to our step. It's caused a lot of problems this term. A lot of orgs have been understandably frustrated with it. So, but this should still incentivize. Like we don't want requests to be submitted the day before the event, and that's a risk by, or like, I'll take any. Actually, if you have anything you'd like to add, go ahead.
And one part of this bill, we're just trying to allow like orgs to get funding for like the rest of the year pretty much. Like orgs would have had to already submit requests, and so there's still events that are going to be happening like in April and whatnot, and just like with the change of the different sessions, it would just be really impossible for them to get money. So just in circumstances like this, and also like with winter break, and different breaks with those like 15 days, it was really stringent. And sometimes like orgs would have to submit requests like a month and a half in advance, and a lot of times they like don't have those events like planned out or fleshed out yet. So this is just helping orgs get money because we have this large fund. Like the goal is to fund these events, and there was just this kind of unnecessary restriction. Like we need to have boundaries in place, but this was just a little too restrictive for a lot of things.
We yield to questions.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Finance and Judiciary Committees. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-120, sponsored by Senator Sowell. A recommendation to increase maintenance on the bathrooms in Coker Life Sciences building.
Senator Sowell, you're recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hey y'all, so this is a simple recommendation just to increase the maintenance and possibly renovate the bathrooms in Coker Life Sciences building. The doors to the bathroom stalls don't lock, so it just leaves the person who's using the restroom to have to sit there and hold the door while they're using it. And I've actually had to do that today. And there have also been some incidents where students have been walked in on while they're using the restroom since the doors can't close. This just leads to privacy and safety concerns. So if we're able to get these bathrooms proper maintenance, then we can make students feel more comfortable and less vulnerable when they use the restrooms. With that, I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Health and Safety Committees. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-121, sponsored by Senator Blanton and Senator Gettins, a recommendation to increase access to transportation at the College of Nursing Clinical Education building in West Columbia.
The senators are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to keep this very brief. 2 points. First one being the new satellite campus, the Clinical Education Building for the College of Nursing in West Columbia, is not on the USC bus route. This recommendation aims to add us out to the bus route so students can use the bus system that we're already paying for to get to and from the Clinical Education Building. Second, it aims to create a student-managed and run resource that nursing students can use to coordinate a carpooling system. that can be used to get to and from the various clinical sites around Columbia, which span a 50-mile radius. That's all I have. I yield to questions.
The senators yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Student Life Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-122, sponsored by Senator Lyons. Sorry, guys, I just get stressed out with last names. I'm really sorry if I'm saying them wrong. A recommendation to immediately address pressing pedestrian safety concerns on Barnwell Street.
Senator Lyons, you're recognized to speak on this legislation. Also to clarify, my Chief of Staff, Smith, who's awesome, is doing clerkship today because our clerk is at Dancing with the Stars Live in Greenville, so she's not here. Senator Geddens. All right, there's been a motion to commit SBL 116-121 to the Health and Safety Committee. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is also sent to the Health and Safety Committee. Senator Lyons, you're recognized.
Hey y'all, as you know, we are like an urban campus, and so there is a lot of traffic where pedestrians have to cross the street. There's busy cars, and so one intersection or crosswalk that's concerning is the one right outside Capstone, where the people have to walk across the street, and people come flying down that road at like 35, 40 sometimes. And there are actually 2 legal crosswalks on that road, but like the crosswalk lines that are mandated by state law are kind of faded. And then also per SCDOT recommendations, there's supposed to be additional like crosswalk signage in the middle of the road. You see those a little bit around campus, those like little yellow signs in the middle of the road that say like state law, yield to pedestrians. And so one of those signs outside Capstone has been missing since the beginning of this semester. It was up last semester, and the other sign at the second crosswalk at that location is like damaged and faded. It's bent sideways. And so like I've seen like, because I have to walk through that, like students don't always look both ways. And also because the signs aren't there, like cars, like if you don't travel through there every day, like you don't know that like there's a crosswalk here. So that's definitely a concern. And so this bill is basically just recommending that these signs, which are classified as R1 signs by the SCDOT, just be the one be reinstalled and the other one be fixed. And it also recommends that the university and the city work together to repaint the crosswalk lines, and just to do that around campus as well. Just with this bill, I like filed a report with the DOT, which then directed me to contact the county. So I contacted the county, and they said, well, it's actually a city issue. So a report got filed with the city of Columbia, so hopefully this should get fixed soon. I do think it's a pretty pressing safety concern for students. So I was just hoping the university would get on board with like fixing this, and then like working with the city to check like all the crosswalks around campus to make sure students are safe. So with that, I yield to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Health and Safety Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
Where do I get the names of them?
It would be in the top left corner of the piece of legislation,
But where?
under the line.
No, it's the new one. Like I'm trying to find them on the drive. Where would I find them?
First reading calendar.
Okay, got it. SBL 116-124, sponsored by the Finance Committee, a recommendation to permit the Finance Committee to allocate funds.
Chairman Wenzel, you're recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hello, everyone. Finance Committee reviewed $17,432.01, and we allocated $14,053.01. With that, I leave my time to questions.
The chairman yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Vice Chairman Matthews. There's been a motion to pass SBL 116-123 by acclamation. Seeing no objections, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the new legislation, the clerk will now read. Sorry, we're supposed to be done by 8, so that's why I'm like speeding through this. But
SBL 116-125, a recommendation to increase insurance coverage and transparency at the Center for Student Health and Wellbeing.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As it stands right now, the Student Health Services only accepts one insurance plan, the university-provided state health insurance plan. This recommendation asks them to expand their insurance coverage, as the majority of us, I would say, the majority of us on campus and probably all of us in this room are still insured under our parents' insurance policy. so we cannot use the services provided by the Student Health Services Center. Second, this bill recommends that they list their out-of-pocket cost prices for the service, all of the services that they provide. Right now, it lists that like a visit will be covered by the Student Health Services fee, which is included in your tuition, and then it has a few other services like labs and X-ray, et cetera, that list the cash prices. I want all of the cash prices listed on the website for the services they provide. I yield to questions.
The sponsor yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, this legislation is referred to the Health and Safety Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read. Hearing none, that completes the call of the first reading calendar. We are now on the call of the uncontested calendar. The clerk will now read.
SBL 11699, introduced by Senator Winters, a recommendation to develop an app for the Garnet Bites program.
Senator Winters, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hi everyone. This is just a recommendation to develop an app for the Garnet Bites program so that students will more easily be notified when there's leftover food on campus. I yield my time.
The sponsor yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is adopted. Congratulations. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-102, sponsored by Senator Pollock. It's okay. A recommendation to assess the current general physicals courses.
Senator Pollock, you are recognized to speak on this legislation. Yeah, I think you did.
Physics, a lot of people have to take it. These are just the general courses. It's a recommendation to take a look at them, try to fix them, because a lot of people are failing, a lot of people are complaining. I yield a question.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is now adopted. Congratulations. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-104, sponsored by Chairperson Dapolito, Chairperson LaPinta, and Vice Chairperson Miller, a bill to amend Section 1260 to prevent conflict of interest due to branch position overlap.
Point of information, that was just tabled for the following week. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-105, sponsored by Senators Cumby and Winters, a recommendation to establish supplemental instruction for all honor sections of supported courses.
Senator Cumby and Senator Winters, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
It's just to make sure that all SI supported courses have an SI, even if it's an honor section. We yield to questions.
The sponsors yield to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. We will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-106, sponsored by Senator Anderson, a recommendation to add a featured organization section on Garnet Gate.
Senator Winters, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Yeah, so this is just, a recommendation to add a featured section on Garnet Gate. I yield my time.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-107, sponsored by Senators Pollock and Lyons, a recommendation to create a pathway alongside the Blossom Street Bridge.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation. Also, my apologies. I didn't mean to stress y'all out. Like, if you do have questions, please ask. We can extend the time of Senate. I just am respecting y'all's time because I'm sure you have things to do as well.
So, the bridge, Blossom Street, you can't walk across it. Anyone wanting to go from one side to the other would have to do like an extra 22-minute walk going all the way to Green Street Bridge. This is just a recommendation for them to possibly address it because it's also a safety concern with people just walking across the railroad tracks. I yield to questions. Oh, unless you have any. Yeah.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Gettins.
So there's no crosswalk. There's no path to cross the railroad. It's right where Park Place, Green Crossing, Palmetto Compass, those apartments, and one Park Place is on campus housing. On that side of the bridge, you can't cross unless you walk all the way to Green Street, and you'd have to cross the bridge there, ending up like near Colonial Life, you know? So it's really out of the way, because right on the other side is just Greek Village. And there's like sidewalks going all the way, but just not across the bridge. And there's a railroad track, and like, I could show you pictures later, but there's a lot of like people walking. Sorry.
Senator Rash.
Yeah. Yeah. The fence is like pushed in now, and it's just like a dirt, like you could tell people going through. When I went to take pictures, I saw a dude just crossing, and it's like,
But all of our senators would follow proper pedestrian laws, I'm sure. Are there any other questions for the sponsors? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-109, sponsored by Senator Miller, a recommendation to form an AED coordination committee within the Office of Environmental Health and Safety.
Chairman Gruner, you're recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hey guys, essentially this bill is, this piece of legislation is just regarding for an AED-related committee that's going to be related to SBL 116-414. Other than that, I yield my time to questions.
Okay, the chairman yields his time to questions. Are there any questions for the chairman? Point of information, I did have a meeting with the AVP of Health and Wellbeing this morning, and I did bring all of these legislation pieces up to her, and she was super interested. So already getting some traction pre-passage. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-110, sponsored by Senators Iftikhar and Hopkins, a recommendation to promote the Teaching with AI course.
Senators are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Thank you. I think I'm the only one speaking, but I'll make it short. It's the same thing I said last week, which is basically evening the field for both instructors and for students, and allowing instructors to have the same access to the same sort of resources to allow them to grade faster, grade more accurate, and this also ties up with Senator Gavin Arriaga's legislation to sort of limit the time they have for grading, and that's all I have to say. Yeah, I'll yield my time to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions for the senator? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Continuing on. Oh, sorry. Oh. Okay. Sorry, I lost my track. I haven't had water in like 4 hours. I'm so thirsty. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-111, sponsored by Senator Pollock, a recommendation to increase student artwork across campus.
Senator Pollock, you are once again recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hey, so last week we dove into kind of talking about that tunnel. Just to clarify, that's not in the thing. That was just one spot. This is just a recommendation to increase artwork across campus, not just there. It's just, that was like one spot that gave me the inspiration. That's why I brought it up. But it was this is just pretty much telling or like recommending to the different colleges to try to promote it more, because Clemson kind of has us beat right now. Just saying. Like, they have a whole website, and we could step up. I yield a question.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-112, sponsored by Senator Silker, a recommendation to require U101 classes to include student organization presentations in their curriculum.
The senator is recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hi guys, same thing as last week. Pretty much just let student organization leaders present to U101 classes to get freshmen more involved on campus. And the U101 curriculum coordinators are very excited about this, and I had a meeting with them a couple weeks ago. So with that, I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? Ayes have it, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-114, sponsored by Senator Miller, a recommendation to increase the quantity of AEDs on campus.
Chairman Gruner, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hey guys, essentially this legislation is addressing the fact that we only have 70 AEDs around campus, which makes us like the third lowest in comparison to other SEC schools. As she mentioned, the AVP is currently interested in this as well. So with that, I yield my time to questions.
The chairman yields his time to questions. Are there any questions for the chairman? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-116, a bill to amend Section 17100 of the Student Government Codes reflecting freshman council committees.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
I thought we voted on this. I thought this was on the second. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Essentially, this piece of legislation was making the adjustment for the freshman council and was renaming it in order to have a more suitable name in correlation with the Dear Colleague letter posted from the office from the Department of Education. With that, I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Brash.
So, and
Sorry, you can answer first, but I have a student government wide answer for that.
as far as I'm concerned, in terms of student organizations that are not elected to the official body, I think they're still allowed to have their names, as well as professors still being allowed to use that language in their classroom. As far as I'm aware, it's just since we're an official university entity, we have to make that change.
Yeah, so to clarify, we do not have controls over student orgs. They're welcome to use whatever language they please. The really shortened version of this is that basically there's two things at the university, something called an ASO or an RSO. Registered student organizations are basically autonomous to the university. Associated student organizations, they're kind of co-linked with it. An example of that outside of student government would be Dance Marathon. So we are considered a part of the university entity, and the Dear Colleague letter asked universities to stop using that language when it comes to their programs and initiatives. So classes are okay, autonomous student organizations are okay, student government as an entity of the university, they're asking us to move away from that language, if that makes sense. Senator Brash. I'm gonna be honest, that would be a great question maybe for I was gonna say Emma, but I didn't want to say it without looking at her first. Our student government advisors, that's higher education realm, and unfortunately I'm a lowly nursing major and I don't understand it that much. So yeah. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? Ayes have it, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-97, introduced by Senator Matthews, a bill to relax entry restrictions on programs.
Senator Matthews, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hello, everybody. This essentially just makes internal club events open to funding. And if we find next term that this is too expensive, that the new budget can't handle it, then we're probably going to dial this back. But for now, because we struggle to get rid of the money within our external budget this semester, or this term, we're going to make this change. But if we need to remake it, if we need to undo it, we will do that in the next term. I yield to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Senator Silker.
Well, we do allow we do fund organizations that accept dues, like fraternities. They get money from us. They request money from us all the time. So this isn't really going to change any of that.
To clarify, it happens a lot. The difference is if they're receiving money from a university set fee. So, for example, if you're a part of, I can speak on my personal experience, like I'm a part of a sorority in the Panhellenic Association, so there's a fee on my tuition separate from the dues I pay to my organization I'm a member of. Those organizations can't receive funding from us. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read. Hearing none, we are now on the call of the contested legislation. The clerk will now read.
Point of information, what about the comptroller one?
What was the number on that?
95 or 96 or 94 or 97. It's upper 90s.
I'm so sorry. I just really want to preface to you guys, like, I'm dealing with a family emergency at home. I'm actually going back to New Jersey, like, at the end of this week. So, like, I've been really off my game. I feel really bad. I promise you guys, I'm normally really on top of it. I'm, like, super embarrassed. Yeah, we do have SBL 11695, a bill to enforce reasonable comptroller response times. So I'll recognize you on that bill.
Okay. Well, William, okay, cool. Yeah, this essentially says that, so we've had issues with comptroller responsiveness this year as well. So this essentially puts a line in there that allows the treasurer to remove comptrollers if they fail to respond to requests within 2 university days. And that would be up to the treasurer, but it gives them that option. So I yield.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions for the senator? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Once again, I'm so sorry that I messed that up. Continuing on with the call of the uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read. Hearing none, that completes the call of the uncontested legislation. We are now on the call of the contested legislation. The clerk will now read.
SBL 116-101, introduced by Senator Costello, a recommendation to uphold campus decorum as a foundation for academic and social excellence.
Senator Costello, you're recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hello, everyone. My resolution calls for the university to adopt clear expectations for professional self-presentation within the student code of conduct, ensuring that the academic atmosphere remains focused and respectful. Similar policies already exist at USC's professional schools, emphasizing the importance of presentation for academic success. And it would not impose strict enforcement, but provide guidance within the codes, ensuring students to uphold standards that reflect discipline, respect, and preparation for the professional futures, much like the already existing academic integrity policies. I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Matthews.
I wouldn't go so far to call it that. I would just call it like upholding principles of dress. It wouldn't imply specific things to wear. It would just recommend basically that the university adopts a certain standard, I guess. So in ways, yeah.
Are there any other questions for the senator? Seeing none, thank you, Senator Costello. Given that this legislation is now on the contested calendar, we will move to a period of debate on this legislation. Do any other senators wish to speak on this matter? Seeing none, it's on the contested calendar. Okay. We will now move to a roll call vote on this legislation. The clerk will call the roll.
Anderson? Blanton?
Yay.
Kidza. Lyons. Matthews. Miller. Mozo. Peterson. Pollock. Rojas. Silkert. Solomon. Sowell. Spurgeon. Wenzel. Windsor. Winters.
'By a vote of 29 nays to 3 ayes, the legislation has failed. Continuing on with the contested reading calendar, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-115, bill to amend section 12120 of the Student Government Codes.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hey guys, so essentially this piece of legislation was meant to amend section 12120 of the Student Government Codes in response to the Dear Colleague letter. I'm going to try and get out of the way in terms of the debate period, but essentially there was a small issue with the demographics wording within one of the sections. So we released an amendment that should have hit the floor tonight, and hopefully that'll kind of solve the problems. But this changed the coding for the department names underneath the president. And with that, we yield our time to questions.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Lyons. I believe so. I did it, yeah. The legislation was placed in the uncontested folder, but it is there. Do you see it now?
In the section, kind of to help visualize, in the section 12120, if you go down to option B, underneath number 2, it talks about rights, liberties, and representation of all students, groups, and demographics. And based off of our conversation with powers and responsibilities, we've just stopped it after students.
You have it now, correct? Okay. Are there any other questions for the senator? Seeing none, thank you. We will now move to a period of debate on this legislation. Do any senators wish to speak on this matter? All right. Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor, the clerk will call the roll.
Anderson.
Aye.
Aye.
Hopkins. Juan. Ijtihad. John.
Proxy aye.
Cassetti.
Proxy aye.
LaPinta. Lyons. Matthews. Miller.
Proxy aye.
Mozo. Peterson.
Peterson, proxy.
Pollock. Rojas. Silkert. Solomon. Sowell. Spurgeon. Wenzel. Windsor. Winters.
By a vote of 31 ayes to 0 nays, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the contested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-117, a bill to amend the Student Government Codes to realign the goals of the Health and Safety Committee.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
This
Oh.
le-
Sorry, really fast. Before I forget, I just want to preface, it's not a huge deal because it's a really weird Senate session tonight, but in the future, when legislation is on the contested reading calendar, it's typically customary that the committee that did deny the legislation, someone from their committee spoke just on the reasoning why, just because it's customary if somebody introduced a piece of legislation, they might want to know why their legislation was found unfavorable. Continue.
So this piece of legislation, goodness, this piece of legislation was based off of the fact that the disabilities is sort of stretched between 3 committees, and it's a little bit vague on sort of like how to properly divert that one. So when we were reviewing the inclusion and equity codes, we decided to put it to the health and safety, since the health and safety interviews the Deputy Secretary of Disabilities, and we've also handled multiple pieces of legislation regarding this topic so far. And with that, I yield my time to questions.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a period of debate on this legislation. Are there any representatives wishing to speak on this topic? Senators Silkert and Brash.
Basically, Powers just found this unfavorable because we felt that disability should go under liberties and representations. That's it. That's literally, yeah.
The senators yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? I know it's been a long day. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Continuing on with the period of debate, are there any other senators wishing to speak on this matter? Senator Diapolito. Liberties and representations.
Okay, I'm sorry. I would like to preface that it should be in liberties and representations. That would make sense. However, health and safety also makes sense because liberties and representations, it's how everyone's equal and everything, but people with disabilities do need a little more representation within health standards and what they can receive from health, and they have a lot of different needs than everyone else, so it would be good for them to be in a committee where they are being looked out for. I yield my time to questions.
The chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Brash. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, continuing on with the period of debate, do any other senators wish to speak on this matter? Seeing none, we will now move to a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Anderson? Blanton? Brash? Byer? Costello? Cumby? Diapolito? Worzanowski? Bobbin? Gay? Geddens? Goodrich? Bruner? Hopkins? Kwong? Issachar? John? Cassetti? LaPinta? Lyons? Matthews? Miller? Moza? Peterson? Pollock? Rojas? Silkert? Solomon? Sowell? Spurgeon? Wenzel? Windsor? Winters?
By a vote of 28 ayes to 3 nays, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the contested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-118, a bill to amend Section 24120 of the Student Government Code.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
So this piece of legislation was essentially regarding the actual committee within Senate and its wordage. Essentially, what we were talking about here within the, within the language was including the part where it talks about its responsibilities in terms of promoting individuality amongst students and human rights under the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution and Civil Rights Act. I just want to preface that this language was chosen based off of the Dear Colleague letter by the reform of this committee based off the response of that. Our goal with this type of wording was to help make sure that any audit or review of the codes makes this committee by definition compliant. It's definitely something that can be reviewed at a later time, and I would suggest that, but other than that, I yield my time to questions.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Brash. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we will now move to a period of debate on this legislation. Do any other senators wish to speak on this matter? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. The clerk will call the roll.
Anderson. Blanton. Brash. Byer. Costello. Cumby. Diapolito. Worzanowski. Dobbin. Gay. Gettins.
Aye.
Goodrich. Brunner.
Aye.
Hopkins. Huang. Inchlar. John.
Proxy aye.
Cassetti.
Proxy aye.
Lapinsa. Lyons. Matthews. Miller.
Proxy aye.
Moza. Peterson. Pollock. Rojas. Silker. Solomon. Sowell. Spurgeon. Wenzel. Windsor. Winters.
By a vote of 30 ayes to 1 nay, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the contested legislation, the clerk will now read. Hearing none, that completes the call of the contested legislation. We are now in line for a period of open discussion. Does any senator wish to bring a matter of attention to the body at this time? Seeing none, we are now in a period of announcements. Are there any announcements from the floor? Okay, hearing none, I have like a super quick one. Please don't forget that we still have Senate until the 19th. If you're sitting in this body and you just found out that you got reelected, congratulations. I hope you guys know that you guys have done like such great, fantastic work. Talked about this in student government group chat a little bit last week, like the big one, but like truly please know that like at the end of the day, you guys do so much great work. You don't look for like anything for recognition, but I promise you I recognize you and I thank you guys so much. And you guys put in so much to serve our student body. It's literally 7:53 and you're still in Russell House on a Wednesday night. Like that's definitely not an ideal situation for most students. But y'all are awesome and you made my decision to come back for another year super easy because of all of y'all. With that, I'm gonna yield my time to the well because we gotta go. With no further announcements, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? Without objection, the Senate will now stand adjourned until Wednesday, March 5th.